My parents gave me up for adoption when I was 6 years old because I was a boy. After 20 years, they asked me for money for my sister's university fees. I'm 25 now. My story starts when I was 6, or rather, from the moment I was born. I'm the third and youngest child of my parents. We weren't rich, but they earned enough to raise 3 kids. We lived in a small town in an old house, which saved us a lot of expenses. My grandparents had a farm that covered many of our needs, especially in the kitchen. My dad worked as a truck driver and came home every 3 or 4 days, while my mom worked as a waitress. My parents already had 2 daughters when I was conceived. I was the unexpected child, and we all know how parents feel when an unplanned child arrives. Of course, I had no idea about this when I was a child, but as I grew older, I slowly started to understand. It wasn't pleasant to know I wasn't wanted. My parents wanted to get rid of me, but the doctor advised against it because it could cause serious health problems for my mom. They especially wanted a girl. Their reason was simple. My mom wanted me to wear the hand-me-down clothes from my older sisters, so she wouldn't have to buy new clothes for me. My 2 older sisters were only a year apart, so they wore the same size clothes and shared everything. They had fun with that, but when I was born as a boy, my parents were disappointed. They hated me. They made me wear girls' clothes and even sent me to school in my sister's old uniforms. It was very embarrassing for me as a child, even though I was very young. I still have a blurry memory of being bullied for wearing girls' uniforms and having long hair. If I complained, all I got was a slap from my mom. I grew up listening to nothing but abuse and harsh words from my parents. Most of them I didn't understand at the time, but when I did, I hated them. My dad was better than my mom, but he was usually absent and had a volatile nature. Some days he seemed neutral, but other days he was just as cruel as my mom, if not more. I won't say I was a saint. I rebelled. As I started to understand their prejudice toward me, I noticed my sisters always got the best of everything, while I got the leftovers. I started being mean to them because, as a child, I blamed them for my misery. Yes, I was punished for my actions, sometimes harshly. I had to make my own breakfast, and many times I went to bed without dinner. I was just a 6-year-old child going through this. There's one incident I remember quite vividly, and I believe it was the turning point in my life. One day, or perhaps that week, I don't remember exactly, I was severely bullied in the playground for dressing like a girl. I came home and discovered that my mom had bought new clothes for my sisters for the holidays. In a fit of rage, I grabbed a pair of scissors and cut them into confetti. I know it was bad, and I'm not proud of what I did, but I was tired of being made fun of because of my parents. I acted out of pain, not malice. Instead of understanding my pain, my parents saw it as a sin, something that deserved the strictest punishment. They put me up for adoption. They waited for a month, but no one was interested. That anger was also directed at me. They constantly told me how useless I was and how no one wanted me. I even heard my mom say, "I wish I had known your gender. I would never have brought you into this world." The thought that my parents hated me so much, for something beyond my control, still haunts me. After a while, when no one came forward to adopt me, my parents started talking about it with their friends and family. Dad knew someone from the neighboring town who ran a food truck with his wife. They were relatively poorer than us, but they wanted a child. They were over 30 and had been trying to have a child for over a decade without luck. Dad spoke to them and they agreed to adopt me immediately. I remember the moment when Dad told Mom and my sisters. They were thrilled and happy to get rid of me. Dad also warned that they were poor and that I might never go to school, but Mom just rolled her eyes and said, "Who cares? Just take him there tomorrow." I stood in the corner, holding the curtain, stunned. Even though I hated my family, I was scared and hurt to have to leave them. I had tears in my eyes, but I didn't cry out loud. They were so happy enjoying the moment that they forgot I was there. When Dad saw me crying, he came over, rubbed my back and said, "Pack your things. We leave tomorrow morning for your new family." I cried out loud when he said this, but I realized it was falling on deaf ears. So I went to my room and packed my things. The journey to my new family was a long one. They were really poor. They had a small house with one room, and they had turned a storage space into my bedroom. I didn't complain because at least they made an effort to provide me with a room. I had never had my own room before. My sisters had their own beds, and I was placed in a bed in the corner of their room with a small wardrobe for my belongings. This room was smaller than ours, but it was cozy. My new parents, Mary and John, were warm and loving, but I came from a broken home. I had never experienced love. I saw how they showed love to my sisters, but never to me. I doubted their intentions and took their love as something temporary. I tried not to get attached to them because I feared they might also abandon me. Childhood trauma. Took me months to realize that they truly loved me and weren't faking it. That year, I didn't go to school because my parents moved me in the middle of the term. But my new parents promised they would send me to school the next year. I saw them working extra hard to save money for my education. That's when I started to love them back. My adoption turned out to be a blessing in disguise. My biological parents never showed up after they sent me to Mary and John, and honestly, I was relieved. For the first time, I was treated for who I was, a child, not a burden. Mary and John were hard workers. They worked 14 to 16 hours a day in their food truck, which was parked just outside their apartment. So I was never alone. When they were working, I could see them directly from the window of my room. Over time, I started spending my days in the food truck, helping them in any way I could. When I enrolled in school, I focused all my time on my studies, but I also helped with household chores when I had free time. I was just over 10 years old when I helped John at the cash register. I was good at math, so I learned about business and accounting at a very young age. After high school, I wanted to dedicate myself completely to their business, but they both insisted that I finish my university education first. They paid for it using their savings. They were getting too old and weak to handle the food truck, and I wanted to take on the responsibility, just as they had done for me. However, they assured me they could manage for a few more years and encouraged me to continue with my studies. I studied business and accounting at university because I ultimately wanted to become an entrepreneur. The day I graduated was the happiest day of my life. Mary and John were overjoyed and even invited my biological parents to attend the ceremony. But they didn't show up. After university, I wanted to run the food truck and let Mary and John retire, but they had other plans for me. They had saved up a significant amount of money and gave it to me. I was overwhelmed by their gesture. They said they could survive on their own for a few more years, but they didn't want me to get involved with the food truck. They gave me the money to start my own business. I didn't want to waste their money, so I used my business knowledge to find a small local restaurant in a good location that was struggling with sales. I proposed to the owner to lease it under a profit-sharing model. After several rejections, I finally got a deal. I started from scratch, renovated the place, revamped the menu to appeal to millennials and Generation Z, and offered the best service to customers. Sales skyrocketed within a year, and I doubled the initial investment. 4 years later, I now have 3 successful cafes in the city. I improved Mary and John's living situation by getting them a better apartment, and I found a small place for myself. I had been living with them until then. I asked them to sell their food truck and enjoy their retirement, but they insisted on continuing it for their happiness. When I left home with my suitcase, I never imagined I'd be a university graduate, but here I am, running restaurant chains in the city. Everything was going smoothly until last month. It was just another normal day at work. I was busy at the cash register of one of my restaurants when I saw a familiar face. It felt like I was seeing a ghost, my biological father. I hadn't seen him in nearly 2 decades. He looked pale and weak. He crossed the store with a wide smile and hugged me. There were customers in the store, so I didn't say anything and led him to a corner. His face brought back all the painful memories of my childhood. I wouldn't have been able to write so many details about my past if he hadn't reappeared in my life. He said he was so happy and proud to see me successful in life. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, speechless. He mentioned that he was just passing through and had met John, who had told him about my successful business. He said he would bring Mom on the weekend. I didn't say anything, and he left shortly after. After finishing my day, I went to John and told him I didn't want to meet my biological parents, who had disinherited me because I was a boy. They knew about my painful childhood, and I just wanted to run away and hide somewhere for the weekend. But Mary insisted that I forgive my parents and move on. I agreed to meet them, but only on the condition that Mary and John would be there with me. So, my biological parents came to John's house. I thought they might apologize for what they had done, but let me tell you, they showed no remorse. Instead, they listed all the favors they had done for me. Mom said I should be grateful to them for finding such good parents who raised me to be a successful person. I was shocked to hear that. I wanted to snap back, but Mary squeezed my hand, signaling me to calm down. I diplomatically said I was blessed to have John and Mary as my parents. I can only describe the meeting as awkward for me. The next day, I got a call from my mother. I didn't recognize her voice. How could I? It was the first time she had called me in 20 years. It was a request for money. She said Dad had lost his regular job and had been working as a contractor for years. She had also lost her job because apparently no restaurant needed a 50-year-old waitress. They were struggling to make ends meet. I asked how much they needed, and she said $2,000 would be enough. She had borrowed that money from her friends over the past few months to buy food, and now her friends were asking for it back, and she had nothing left. I hung up, saying I would think about it and call her back. The thing is, as much as I hate them, I felt bad because people were pressuring them for money. Sometimes I felt like they were just exploiting me, but what if they really did need help? I feel guilty for letting them go through the embarrassment, even though I had the money. Update 1. Thanks for all the comments and feedback. I got mixed reactions from people about helping my mom with the $2,000. I discussed it with Mary and John. Mary was happy I was considering helping my parents, but also warned me to be careful. John said it was my money, so the decision should be mine. He also shared the same fear as me. What if they were trying to take advantage of my emotions? After thinking about it a lot, I decided to make this one final attempt with my biological parents, and I transferred the money to their account. I felt good being able to help my family, even though they had been cruel to me. But I was wrong. Or maybe I was right because I feared they would try to exploit me financially, and indeed that's exactly what they were trying to do. A week after sending the money, Mom called me again. I answered with mixed emotions. She thanked me for the help and then said, "Your sisters want to see you. When do you think you could come?" At that moment, I truly felt like my family wanted me back. I knew my parents had wronged me as a child and I hated them for it, but I never hated my sisters. Maybe when I was a little boy, I did some bad things, but after growing up, I never blamed them. It wasn't their fault. Sometimes I even thought that my parents had gotten rid of me because they were poor, not because they were evil. I told Mom we could meet next Sunday, and I could drive to their house. She interrupted and said, "Why don't we meet somewhere else?" I didn't think much about it and just agreed. She said she would send me the details of the place and time. After hanging up, I felt this unease. Why didn't she want me to visit their house? I mean, it doesn't matter where we meet, but still, when you reconnect with your family after so many years, don't you think you would invite them to your house instead of meeting in a restaurant? Still, she sent the details, and it turned out to be one of the most elegant restaurants in the city. I didn't think much of it at the time because my mind was preoccupied with the fact that they didn't invite me home. I went to the restaurant and they were already there. My sisters ran up and hugged me. For a moment, I was happy to see them after so many years. I enjoyed catching up with them until the menu arrived, and they started ordering food. They deliberately picked the most expensive items. When they asked what I wanted, my dad just smiled and said, "Order the most expensive." My son is a big man now. That was so petty of him to say. If it had been me or Mary saying that, it would have been a proud moment. But coming from my biological parents, it was mean and cruel. There was nothing I could do but sit there and watch them devour the food, emptying my wallet. Yes, I paid the bill. I had some pretty wild thoughts in my head, like disappearing before the bill came, but that would have been too harsh on them. I swore at that moment never to fall for their emotional trap again. I was cold the rest of the afternoon, and I bet they didn't even notice. When I left, they didn't even invite me to their home. Instead, my older sister asked, "Where are we going for dinner?" I faked a smile and said, "Nowhere," and said goodbye. I went back home and told Mary about my greedy family. She was shocked when I told her. She's a very kind and independent woman, so all of this really disturbed her. She advised me not to be a fool again and not to think too much about them. She told me to focus on my own life. I did that. My sisters called me about a week later, but I didn't respond. My mom called too, but I didn't answer. It's been 2 months since then, and now they've stopped texting or calling. I think they got the hint that I didn't want them in my life. Update 2. Hello everyone. Thanks for all the support. As I mentioned in my last post, I stopped responding to my sisters and my biological parents because I realized they only wanted me for my money. Almost 5 months later, yesterday my mom called again. I saw the phone ringing and answered without thinking. She started with some superficial small talk, asking about me and my job. It sounded so fake and pretentious that I couldn't stand it. I asked her what she wanted. She sighed and said that my sisters had to drop out of college because Dad couldn't afford their tuition. They wanted me to pay for their university education. I was furious. She asked me to calm down and said they were my sisters, my family, and I should help them. At that moment, I was at work, and I didn't want to lose my temper, so I hung up. She called again in the afternoon, and I ignored the call a few times, but it was bothering me. Ignoring her wasn't working. I realized that the next time she called, I would answer. When I answered, she asked if my sisters were excited about going back to college. Then she asked how we were going to handle it, if I was going to pay up front for the semester. She suggested I transfer the full amount to her, and she'd pay the tuition before each semester. She said I shouldn't make it complicated. I said, "Wait a minute, I'm not making any payments." She was so surprised. She didn't expect me to say that. She asked, "What do you mean you don't want to pay up front?" "It's fine, we can pay in installments." I repeated, "I don't want to pay at all." I told her that my older sister's education wasn't my responsibility, especially since my parents abandoned me and never cared for me. Even now, they were only talking to me because they wanted to take advantage of my money. She was boiling with rage and lost her temper with my words. She said, "Don't forget, we gave you life. Everything you are is because of us. Your dad found a good family for you, and now when it's time for you to repay us, you can't avoid your responsibilities. Your sisters and your parents are your responsibility, and you have to take care of all of us." I had so much to say, but it felt like talking to deaf and narcissistic people, so I just said, "Well, yes, I owe a lot to my parents. Those are John and Mary. They deserve all the credit for my success. As for you, I don't know who you are. None of my documents have your names, and I don't have any photos with you, so I don't think I know you." She threw insults at me, but I said, "Wrong number, ma'am," and hung up. Now, they can call me selfish, cruel, or whatever they want, but I'm not going to waste my hard-earned money on my so-called family. They were never my family. They discarded me when I was only 6 years old. Yes, I got comments on my previous updates about calling John and Mary by their names and not Mom and Dad. I actually do call them Mom and Dad, but not right away after I arrived with them. I did when they took me to school and worked hard to meet my needs and loved me. But for the sake of narrating things here, I referred to them by their names. John and Mary are my true mom and dad, and my biological parents. I don't call them anything. They don't exist to me,